To today's webinar on innovative green finance mechanisms. We are excited to have you join us as we embark on a very important topic, exploring how local and regional governments can drive progress towards climate neutrality while unlocking new socioeconomic opportunities for their communities. Next slide, please. As many of you know and as know, cities, towns, and regions stand at the forefront of both climate change impacts and sustainability efforts. However, sustainable climate action requires more than only policy. It needs financing. Innovative green finance mechanisms, such as green bonds, offer local and regional governments powerful tools to fund sustainable projects that directly address pressing environmental challenges. By utilizing these tools, municipalities can attract investment in renewable energy, public transportation, resilience infrastructure, and more, making sure that there is a local economic growth while promoting environmental stewardship. ICLEI Local Governments of Sustainability as a global network of over 2,500 local and regional governments committed to sustainable urban development in over 125 countries is well positioned to lead this initiative, and we believe in the power of shared knowledge and collaboration. That's why, together with our partners and experts on the field who are accompanying us in this webinar, we are launching a series of targeted podcasts and webinars. This series aims to empower our members and our broader network with the practical knowledge and tools needed to finance sustainability initiatives at the local level. So today's webinar will kick off this series by focusing on transition bonds, a subset of green bonds that facilitate the shift from less sustainable to more sustainable practices, particularly in sectors that are traditionally hard to abate. We are excited to present Japan's pioneering experience with transition bonds as a model for other countries, highlighting opportunities to advance sustainability and integrate a just transition into local projects from the hand of ICLEI Japan office. We are honored to have the city of Kyoto and the province of Bali, Indonesia, with us today to share their ambitious and innovative finance solutions. Additionally, we also have with us the Sumitomo Mitsui Banking Corporation and Invest, which will showcase some of the sustainable finance instruments. We hope that today's session will inspire and equip you with new ideas and approaches to drive local action towards sustainability, and thank you for joining us in advance, and we look forward to an engaging and fulfilling discussion. In the meantime, you can find more information about the webinar series and the podcast about green bonds through the QR codes that are on the slide. Next slide, please. I would like to introduce now the agenda of the webinar today. So we will first discuss about Japan transition bonds. We're going to explore the transition bonds in Japan and their role in financing sustainable projects, the benefits and potential of sustainable bonds markets and impacts for cities, and how to issue bonds for governments and what are the steps involved, the eligibility criteria and key considerations. Next, we will move on to traditional and innovative financing methods for sustainable infrastructure projects, introducing innovative instruments as financial sources for projects, understanding the strengths and limitations of green traditional and innovative financing tools, and also exploring some examples of sustainable finance instruments. Then we will move into innovative green finance solutions, introducing the preconditions and framework necessary to make sure that the sustainable bonds do consider and encompass environmental integrity. We are honored to have the presence of the city of Kyoto and the province of Bali, who will provide also best practices and real-world examples from their end. And we will then nearly finalize the session with a Q&A session where the members of the audience will be invited to address their questions to the speakers of the webinar. And we are going to finalize the webinar with a wrap-up and closing remarks by the hand of Mr. Togo Uchida, Director of ICLEI Japan Office. And next slide, please. I would like to perhaps introduce, I'm honored to present the speakers for today. For Togo Uchida, Togo spent over 8 years in Thailand and Cambodia as Japan International Cooperation Agency, project formulation advisor on climate change and environment. And after serving a year at the Institute for Global Environmental Strategies as program manager, promoting sustainable development goals in cities in Asian countries, Togo has assumed the position of director at the ICLE Japan office since July 2018. Welcome, Togo. Mr. Cedric Remont is the Deputy General Manager of the Solution Group at Sumitomo Mitsui Banking Corporation in Tokyo, where he focuses on developing sustainable finance platforms and engaging with global investors, regulators, and international agencies. With over 25 years of experience in sustainable finance, green bonds, and debt capital markets across organizations like UNDP or Climate Bonds Initiative, he provides expert insights and innovative solutions to clients. Welcome, Cedric, to the session, and we're honored also to be with you. Mr. Bjorn Bergstrand is the head of sustainability at Common Invest, the Swedish local government debt office and the largest green bond issuer in the Nordic countries. Bjorn has been a leading green finance voice in Sweden since the launch of Common Invest Green Bonds Framework in 2015 and the issuance of the inaugural 600 million US dollars green bond, at the time the largest ever green bond issued out of the Nordic countries. Bjorn takes an active part in shaping sustainable financing market practices in the Nordics and has initiated a Nordic public sector issuer cooperation on impact reporting. He has also served as a member of the expert committee attached to the Swedish government inquiry on green bonds. Welcome, Bjorn. We also have representatives from the cities. We have Mr. Takeshi Terunuma, who joined the Japan Overseas Cooperation Volunteers dispatched by JICA and joined the city of Kyoto in 2010 and has been since then in his current position until April 2022, engaging in environmental education and international cooperation projects. Welcome, Takeshi, to the webinar. And we have, last but not least, Dr. Narayana, who is currently acting as an expert for the governor of Bali, having worked on regulations for clean energy, plastic waste, and electric vehicles. He is also the chairman of the provincial state-owned company Perumdake Tabali Saguna, and at the Rural Bank BPR Suryaja Ubud, and head of the foundation Amerta Bali Lestari for the implementation of the Net Zero Roadmap 2045. Welcome, Dr. Narayana. Then I will go to the last slide from my end. Just some housekeeping rules. This webinar will be recorded, and I will start recording now. If it hasn't been recorded, Kata, please let me know if it has been recorded. And
yes, please go ahead with recording.
okay. Please, Kata, start recording since I cannot stand by myself. Okay. There you go. So this webinar is being recorded, as you can see now, and will be publicly available after the session today. Please use the Q&A bots function to raise questions throughout the webinar, and there will be time towards the end of the webinar for the speakers to address them. Then, without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Mr. Togo Uchida to start his presentation. The floor is yours, Togo.
Thank you for the introduction. So from my side, I have 15 minutes to talk a bit about the context of subnational governments in Japan on sustainability, and then I would like to lead on to some of the current development of financial schemes that is happening in Japan in connection to local government and sustainability. Next slide, please. To just give you an overview of Japan. So in Japan, we have total of 1,788 municipalities, which includes prefectures, cities and towns and villages. And in terms of climate agenda, out of which 1,112 local governments have already declared to become net zero by 2050. This represents 62.2% of the total municipalities, but in terms of population representation, it's exceeding 99%. So you can see how it has becoming a norm for local governments in Japan to declare and then strive to become net zero by 2050. And in terms of planning, you could see that for the mitigation, the area-wide mitigation plan has been created and approved for the 727 local governments. In terms of the mitigation plan for the local government operation, over 1,650 local governments have already made this plan and implementing the projects in their jurisdictional buildings and facilities and activities. In terms of adaptation plan, the number is low, but it has been increasing since it has been stipulated in a national registration to mandate local governments to create adaptation plan as well. So now currently 337 local governments have adaptation plan, which represents around 18.8%. Mind you that we are very, how do I say, crisis prone society. So actually adaptation plan is as a number is not that much, but we do have a lot of disaster reduction plans. Almost 100% of local governments have these plans. So it's just a matter of whether if that is focused on climate change or not. And the number you are seeing now is focusing on the climate adaptation plan. And I would like to introduce also other sustainability agenda, for example, local biodiversity strategic action plan. We now have 213 local governments who have these plan, out of which we have 47 prefectures. So actually all 47 prefectures have biodiversity strategic action plan. But when it comes to cities, towns, and villages, the number is less. We also have a lot of local governments who are working on SDGs. You can see that that number is exceeding 1,170. Next slide, please. So what is in the local government mind? I think this is also quite well known. So Japan is very how do I say, aging society where the population is also decreasing. So this is posing a lot of challenge for local government operation, as you could imagine that if the population decreases, then the operation of infrastructure service becomes very challenging. Because when you think about it, the density population, the income will be lower, such and such. So really, the key subject of local government interest is on population decrease and aging society and how local governments can continue providing public services within that condition. So economic growth and community revitalization becomes also a key and very important subject for local governments. In addition to resilient disasters where we have tsunami and earthquake, and also food, energy, wood dependency issue as well. So with these challenges, the local governments have additionally have to consider about carbon neutral biodiversity protection, and there are also recognition that internationally the plastic pollution is becoming a issue, as well as pesticides, such and such. So really, there's so many things that the local government have to address, and the matter is how local governments can realize this. Next slide, please. So this is kind of like a summarizing that situation. So really, what the local governments in Japan are now focusing on is to maximize the use of the local resources in a sustainable manner and to achieve improvement of environment, economy, and society in an integrated way. And in order to do that, they are working on digitization and collecting data, information. They are working on involving citizens, companies, and researchers. And of course, which is our today's theme, which is mobilizing finance and investment. Next slide, please. And one of the approaches that's been taken, especially in the case of Japan, I'm identifying four key approaches. The first one is promoting city-to-city collaboration. And really, from the early stage of the climate action in Japan, since Kyoto Protocol, really, the Japanese national government have been promoting city-to-city collaboration. This is basically because Japan is a highly urbanized country where over 90% of the population is already living in the urban area, and 70% of our land is forest. So you could imagine that some local governments are very dense and very urbanized, and some local governments are very rural, with natural abundant resources. So it was very natural for the national government to consider city-to-city collaboration from the early stage when it comes to addressing the sustainability. So it's really about city A and city B collaborating and together achieving their interest and goal together by collaborating. Also, the second part is promoting multi-level collaboration. I'll come back to this in a later slide, as well as promoting multi-stakeholder collaboration. And then number four is promoting means to facilitate action. And then where this the financial mechanism becomes the agenda. Next slide, please. So very quickly, so city-to-city collaboration, the national government is actually promoting city-to-city collaboration, domestic collaboration, as well as international collaboration. So really the national government is encouraging local governments in Japan to go outside, collaborate with other local governments, especially in the ASEAN region, to share the local government experience and knowledge to also support local governments in the ASEAN area to improve their environmental management and climate change agendas. And of course, we, as ICLEI, we work together with national government as well in promoting this and sharing knowledge, such as like today's webinar is happening in a domestic level as well. Next slide, please. Second one is multi-level collaboration. I wanted to kind of mention a little bit about this because actually in the case of Japan, the national government, local government collaboration is functioning very well. So there's a lot of collaborating activities. And one good example is on the climate change mitigation. I've mentioned here ambition loop. Where we are talking about how the local government commitment has been influenced in national government, and the national government decision again influencing the local government to do further. So the timeline is starting from 2018, where IPCC special report on 1.5 degree was announced. Kyoto City announced net zero by 2050 as the first case of local governments after the IPCC special report was announced. And then after that, as ICLEI, we have supported other local governments to follow Kyoto's example. And then the national government took a note on this particular development. So when we had COP25 in Madrid, we worked together with the national government of Japan on together promoting local government declaration. So back then it was 28 local governments who declared zero, and we brought that to Madrid. And then after Madrid COP25, this continued. And actually, when the national government saw a lot of local governments declaring zero by 2050, they also declared zero in 2020. And when the Japanese government declared zero by 2050, they immediately established a council where local leaders and the ministries gathered, and they created a roadmap to become decarbonized. And through these roadmap, they've actually further worked on amendment of legislation, and also a lot of these ministries who participate in this creation of roadmap created the subsidy to support local governments and private companies for them to kind of decarbonize. So this is the result of why we have now 1,112 local governments who have declared to become zero by 2050. Next slide, please. And multi-stakeholder collaboration is also something that's been developed for the last 10 years or so now already, which has been very popular, where through the recognition that not one stakeholder can decarbonize by themselves. So the national government, as well as local governments, private sector, research institutions, there was a lot of platform that was created, mainly led by national government, where these different stakeholders gather with and sharing knowledge and experience, and then further discussing about what is possible to respond to the individual agenda. So climate change, SDGs, biodiversity, for each particular agenda, we have a platform where these multi-stakeholders can gather and then exchange ideas. Next slide, please. So finally, the financial mechanism. So of course, from the government point of view, as well as local government perspectives, in order to respond to the sustainability agenda, it's very important for the stage to be set. So, the multi-stakeholder, multi-level collaboration is more like a stage. But then, in terms of really implementation, of course, financial availability is the key. So that has been a key development as well. So you could see that JICN has been established in 2022, which has been a little bit recent, but it was established through government investment as well as by the shareholder, including governmental banks and private banks and also private companies. And really to finance the climate activities, and that was their purpose. So all these major shareholders or stakeholders gathering to create a plan, create a bankable projects, and then financing that directly. The Ministry of Environment also have a portal called Green Finance Portal, which I recommend the participants to take a look into it after this seminar, because there's a lot of information uploaded in this portal. And this is really to try to kind of share the information about what's available and what kind of projects are being implemented. And then it goes on to kind of explaining about the basics about what is green finance, for example. So really, it's the government is playing a role to try to facilitate the whole society to actually implement more on this green finance. And other means, also the government is providing financial support for the private and also local governments who are planning to issue a green bond or green loan or sustainability bond or sustainability linked loan, to really, for example, because local governments need to conduct a study before issuing a bond. So that kind of study can be financed by the national government subsidy, for example. So these support is really, really useful. And there's been a continuous governmental budget allocated for the local governments to also use to create these kind of financial programs. Next slide, please. So with these development, now you can see that there's been a lot of increase in local governments issuing a green bond, starting from the Tokyo Metropolitan Government in 2017 and followed by Nagano and Kanagawa Prefecture. In terms of the smaller local governments, including cities, Kawasaki City was the first city government to issue a green bond in 2021, but followed by cities like Fukuoka, Sendai, and Kyoto. And Kyoto will be presenting later on about their schemes. And one of the development that I would like to also share is the Hyogo Prefecture in 2023 issued the bond together with 14 city governments within their jurisdictional area. So really, it was a multiple local governments coming together and issuing the green bond. And there were two other examples of local governments jointly issuing the bond in 2023. And we see that this trend will increase in the future as well. And the usage of these funds on both mitigation and adaptation, and the sectors are from energy efficiency transition, energy transition, so renewable energy projects to flood protection and improving parks, expanding greenery, building renovation, such and such. Maybe the speakers following my presentation can actually go a little bit further on some of the examples. Principles and guidelines used is basically on the International Capital Market Association based guideline is used together with the Financial Service Agency, which is the government agency, as well as Ministry of Environment guideline has been used to create these bonds. Next slide, and this will be my final slide. So I'm just pointing out a bit of a point, and maybe this could be a bit of a question, throwing questions to the following presenters in this session. So first of all, there are many types of bonds that could be issued, and not only green bond. And of course, it has to be based on local government jurisdiction. So what I'm talking about is the case of Japan. And Japan definitely has, of course, has a jurisdiction about what local governments can do and cannot do. So really, local government is trying to kind of issue these bonds within the jurisdictional framework of the national government. But within that, even though there's a lot of potential, so in Japan, there's a sustainability bond, blue bond, social bond, etc., that local government are already issuing or already working on to kind of further expand. Second point is usage of fund can be limited or widened depending on the purpose. When it comes to financial products, it could be project-based finance, or it could be key performance indicators-based fund use. So it's really depending on how the local governments identify the usage of these bonds, and then really trying to kind of identify whether if there's a demand for that kind of bond or not. And of course, major purpose of local governments issuing the bond is to bridge the gap of financial gap to finance these transitions to zero carbon society. But it could be also used to involve citizens, meaning that some of the local government bonds that's issued by local governments in Japan focuses on the individual, how do I say, buyers, shareholders to be involved. So they restrict the bond to be bought by the people who are living within their jurisdiction or the surrounding jurisdictions. And this purpose is really to get people involved in the local government activity. So really, it's really depending on how the local governments would like to design it and to identify the purpose. And it could be issued based on that. And also bond can be issued jointly. So of course, if the bond is issued only within the one local government, the usage is limited. So meaning the liquidity is limited. But if you increase that, then that could be increased, meaning that the condition can be better financially. So it opens up possibility for smaller local governments to also have access to finance. And that leads to the possible future development. I've identified two. And going from the second one is can these experiences be exported to global south? So of course, these financial schemes can be a little bit tricky and you need knowledge to issue these financial kind of bonds. But really, if the experience has been accumulated in the private level, as well as a lot of different banks out there, including the speakers we have today, in this session. Maybe the Global South local governments can also have additional access to finance, utilizing these experience and expanding these experience that's happening in Japan or elsewhere on the Green Fund issues. And also, can these bonds respond to the other social needs as just transition and equity? So these are something that I personally feel that still could expand a bit more in terms of not only financing the climate and renewable energy, for example, but in addition to that, maybe addressing more on the just transition and equity. Can the bond use for a single parent household to implement renewable energy, something like that? Can we fund those people who have less access to energy? And I think these are the areas that I think local governments are interested, but needs still further discussion on whether if that kind of product can be created or not. I'll stop here. Thank you so much, Jome. I'll pass it on to you.
Thank you very much, Togo, for the presentation and this really positive note to hear about the example also from the Hyogo Prefecture on and the way that actually cities can and local governments can issue bonds as well, jointly with when gathering the force of different other similar level local governments. And this is really a positive note, and I hope that this is also replicated as well. Thank you so much for the presentation, Togo. And now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Cedric Dumont to introduce the traditional and innovative financing methods for sustainable infrastructure projects. Cedric, the floor is yours.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you today. So I'm going to speak about whether local governments can access what we call the thematic bond and loan markets. I mentioned bonds and loans because actually we, SMBC as a bank, as a universal bank, does both and actually does a lot of loans. That's an important part of the financing that we provide. And I think it's a market that has developed quite a bit as well, alongside the bond market. So let's move right to the next page, please. So basically, the global debt market over the last 10 years has seen the emergence of this new type of financing. It's not a revolution about the type of instruments. Bonds and loans have been around for very long time to finance projects. But what is new is that now we put a label onto those financing. They can be green, as we heard previously from the presentation. They can be social. There are new topics as well that appear, like sustainability, even transition. Transition is a new term that is quite popular at the moment. So the way this market has developed, it is developed on a voluntary basis. So basically the financing mechanism remains the same, but on top of the typical instrument that is used, the project sponsors would publish a framework that would set different conditions to comply with international standards that have been created by mainly two organizations, which is the International Capital Markets Associations for the bonds and the Loan Market Associations for the loans. So this type of rules have been very instrumental in developing this market because they have provided very strong guidance. So the implications for local governments is basically that if you want to raise financing, you now need to develop a strategy that is in line with those global standards. And you will find that the financiers, i.e. the banks or the securities houses, are now very equipped with the knowledge and the resources to help you in that journey. And they compete actually with each other to bring these types of transactions to market. But what is very important is the credibility of the strategy. The framework that is put in place must demonstrate some clear intention to invest in projects that are truly green or truly social or truly focusing on transitions. Because in the end, the investors who are going to use these instruments want to make sure that when they put it into their portfolio, that increasingly have a mandate to comply with these green and social objectives, they don't misrepresent to their client. This is very important. There is always a risk of misrepresentation, and investors and financial institutions will be very sensitive to that. So it comes down to the credibility of the framework. On the next slide, you will see a description of the different types of instruments, and you may feel that it's a lot of information. And indeed, there are several types of these instruments. We've heard from the previous presenter about them. So the most popular one are the green bonds and loans, indeed. So they are based on the types of projects that are being financed. That's what we called a use of proceeds instrument. That means that the entity that is raising financing promises to use this capital only on certain projects. And these projects must align with the definitions of green. The second instrument that is popular are the social bonds and loans. So similarly, these are use of proceeds instruments that finance social projects. And if you have projects that combine green and social, typically we will call that a sustainability bond or sustainability loan. And then there is an additional instrument that came up recently, and actually is very popular in Japan at the moment. It's called a transition bond. So these are projects that cannot be called green because they relate to dirty industries or hard-to-abate sectors that still have carbon emissions that contribute to climate change. But these bonds will invest in projects that will transition those activities to low-carbon activities. These four categories are all use of proceeds. So the issuer will promise to spend the capital on specific CapEx plans. And then there's another category called the sustainability linked, which is what the previous presenter was explaining as linked to KPIs, key performance indicators. These instruments are very different because you don't need to reserve the capital for certain spending. You can spend it for general corporate purposes. However, you need to indicate what are the outcomes, what are the targets that you seek to achieve by what time period. And if you achieve them, you can have a lower interest rate, or if you don't achieve them, the interest rate may go up as a penalty. These are new types of instruments because they focus on the outcomes rather than the spending. And through these different types of instruments, we now have a full toolkit for local governments to be able to choose, depending on their objectives, what they want to finance. What is it useful? Well, sometimes it's quite obvious what type of projects needs to be spent on. For example, if it's an electricity generation entity, you know how much it costs to invest, so that money can be spent up front. But in some other cases, the impact may be more delayed into the future. The technology may not exist today even. So it may take some time to spend the proceeds from the debt issuance before the outcome can be produced. So that creates more flexibility, and that's for the benefit of the issuers. Next slide, please. So this market has seen a very strong growth. It started about 10 years ago, and now it reached a peak around 2021 when there was a lot of issuance during the COVID crisis, where social bonds were also issued in large volumes, but also those new types of securities were appearing. There was a little bit of a dip in the last 2 years, but this year, again, the momentum is quite strong. And now we have an ecosystem that is involving different parties that all collaborate together. So the local government is the most important because this is the entity that is going to create the spending program, what type of projects are necessary, that is going to create the framework or the roadmap, as we are going to hear from the province of Bali, for example, which is the long-term goals of what the local government wants to achieve. Typically, within the local government, you need to create a sustainability team that is in charge of that agenda, that is able to work on this framework, communicate appropriately to the outside world what are the objectives that are being sought, and then speak the language of what that is expected from the investors. And then there is the finance team, obviously, that is in charge of the budgeting of those projects. Sometimes there needs to be some investment in technology as well, because if you use an instrument that tracks how the money is spent, this needs to be tagged in the budgeting system. So in the accounting, it's sometimes necessary to create a reporting mechanism to be able to account for how the money is being invested. On the legal side, obviously, it's a contract when a debt instrument is issued. So there will need to be also some amendment to the traditional legal documentation to account for this thematic style of securities. And then typically a bank or an underwriter, in the case of bonds, will need to be involved to be able to structure the instrument. And then an external reviewer, which we call the second party opinion, will need to be hired to be able to review the framework to provide the assurance that the framework is in line with global standards. That's very important to reassure investors that the instrument is proper for their investments. There may be some auditors as well who may come, for example, when we have a sustainability-linked instrument to assess that the KPIs have been met. It's very important, for example, if the interest rate changes depending on those KPIs. And then the investors, most importantly, need to be convinced. So there will be, the need to create a storyline to explain how the local government is moving towards more sustainable practices. It may be related to the climate, but it may be also related to the social objectives that are being sought. Or in the case of transition, as we see it in Japan, there's a lot of discussion on what a transition should be. Is it about investing in certain technology or not, and so on. So that's quite important also. On the next slide, there is a few examples of securities that have been used. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but you will be able to use it as a reference for large transactions in the market that have followed these guidelines. It can be quite interesting to see what type of projects have been used. You will see a lot of renewable energy, clean transportation, energy efficiency in the green types of securities. Climate change adaptation also is quite a big topic. On the sustainability-linked bonds or loans, you will see very often the objective of reducing the carbon emissions as a target, because this is something that is easily measurable and that can be used. You can target to reduce by X% over a certain period the carbon emissions of a certain industry or of a certain city. On the social bonds, there is also quite a few projects that are being used. Essentially, the most often are the projects that promise the access to essential services or affordable housing projects, projects that focus on socioeconomic development or the generation of employment or affordable basic infrastructure. And then on the transition side, you will see also some investment into new technologies, and it's quite an evolving space as well. On the next slide, we present you the different stakeholders that are sometimes involved in developing these markets. So I mentioned the ICMA and LMA as the standard setters, but there are also some additional bodies that have issued guidelines, sometimes at the regional level, at the national level, or at the international level. We often hear the term taxonomy, which is a way to provide a catalog of activities and define which ones are green and which ones are not green, or on the social side as well. There are some famous examples. At the international level, you have the Climate Bonds Initiative that has developed a global taxonomy that is known by all investors around the world. At the regional level, you see some initiatives as well. The European Union, for example, has developed a taxonomy. The ASEAN region in Southeast Asia has developed a taxonomy as well. And then you see some initiatives at the local level, either carried by the Ministry of Environment, the Ministry of Finance, or sometimes the central banks of a particular country. So this guidance is very useful because it helps local governments to decide on what types of projects they can consider as green, depending on the type of investors that they are seeking. So typically a national taxonomy, for example, in Japan, as was said, there is some guidelines that exist to identify what type of projects are considered greens for Japan. Sometimes the investors that the local government is trying to reach are regional, and maybe the ASEAN taxonomy may be also considered in terms of making sure that we can attract more investors. And then sometimes the ambition is higher and the global taxonomy can be used to try to reach the very wide spectrum of investors. So there are some limitations to this type of financing that you need to be aware. Obviously, I said at the beginning, this is a voluntary mechanism. So this label framework is not part of the legal documentation. It's a market that remains based on trust, on reputation. So that creates, a moral bond with the investors rather than a legal one. So issuers and investors will all be concerned about the reputation of a financing, whether, we see some headlines sometimes where some entities are accused of what is called greenwashing, which means essentially that the issuer or the borrower has misrepresented the way this capital is being used. And that's bad for reputation. That's bad for not only the reputation of the issuer, but also the bank that worked with the issuer and so on. And now, increasingly, the regulators are going deeper into those definitions to make sure that the market remains true to its word. So sometimes the regulator is trying to incentivize the market by providing some subsidies, some tax incentives, some rebates, or some help. Some multilateral agencies are also providing sometimes technical assistance to support this market. But now there's also more stringency on how the rules should be applied. On the next slide, you will see a list of all the green bonds that SMBC as a bank has issued. I won't dwell too much into it, but this is to show that for financial institutions, this is becoming a regular tool in accessing financing from the debt capital markets. Let's move on to the next one straight away. So for the issuers, as a local government, it is important to demonstrate the ESG and the sustainability strategy. The issuance process will showcase some of the projects that are included in the CapEx program. The ambition from the issuer side is to access a lower cost of capital, what we call a greenium, because actually through those securities, it has been demonstrated that for some issuers, there is a pricing advantage by issuing this type of securities due to the large demand from investors for this thematic instrument. For investors, there is an increasing move to change the investment mandates that investors are offering to their clients. So they promise more investment into green, more focus on ESG. Some funds are being launched with a very strong mandate around these issues. So for local government, is a way to tap into this new demand for financing, and a good process is to try to identify what are those investors and how they look at it. Usually they communicate quite well on their intention because they market it as a product. So it's good to listen to what they're saying so that you have a good idea of where the demand is. Governments have made a good use of this type of instruments to fund national policies towards the greening of their economies. It's usually aligned with yeah.
Just to a briefly reminder that you have 1 more minute left, more or less.
Okay. So I will go more quickly. For the regulators, it's important to regulate these markets, and for banking institutions, there is an opportunity to help issuers access financing. The next 4 slides are example. I think it's quite important that I show you some real case and some that SMBC has been part of. So the first one is a social loan for affordable housing in India for 5 years. It's a sizable loan that has been focusing on the Urban Development Corporation for infrastructure project that focus on this. So that was possible through the creation of a social loan framework that was, deciding on how the money would be spent with eligible categories that are aligned with the social loan principle. The second one is a green loan for electric vehicle on the next slide. So this is again a financing in India where there is a special purpose vehicle that has been created to fund some electric buses in a province. So a 6-year financing has been arranged to finance these buses and finance the procurement, the operation, and the maintenance of those electric buses. And the SMBC was acting as a sole lender, sole hedging bank, and green loan coordinator. The third example on the next slide is a sustainability revenue bond in the US, issued by the New York City Housing Development Corporation to increase the supply of multifamily houses and stimulate economic growth. So again, this was a green loan with a green loan framework, and SMBC participated as a provider of liquidity. And finally, on the next slide, we had also a bond, a green bond for a municipality in India, which was financing some technologies to ensure equitable access to high quality infrastructure. And that was a point raised by the previous speaker about how do you ensure that there is a broad benefit for society in this type of infrastructure. So in that case, the use of proceeds was directed towards sewage plants and a pumping station as well to support these activities by the local government. So all these examples demonstrate that it is possible to access those markets through very specific spending plans that are aligned with the objectives of the local government. So thank you very much for listening, and I'll remain available for any questions.
Thank you, Cedric, so much for the very comprehensive presentation and really highlighting the different financial mechanisms and how they actually take place and how they can be tackled at the local level. Seeing that we already have some questions in the Q&A bots for you, I believe, Cedric, and also for Togo so far, and for the rest of speakers, I invite you to perhaps type the answers of this Q&A of these questions, and during the Q&A session, if we have time, then we'll go through these questions. Thank you so much in advance. And without further ado, please, Mr. Bjorn, go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, Jaume, and thank you also to Cedric for this solid introduction to the sustainable finance market. I will concentrate on the environmental integrity of sustainable bonds, and more specifically on green bonds, where Kommuninvest has been an active participant in the market development since almost 10 years back. So allow me to share my presentation. I think you can now see this. Just to provide some context, Kommuninvest is a local government-owned credit institution founded in the mid-1980s and now owned by almost all Swedish local governments. There are 310 in total. 295 of these own Kommuninvest and are members of the ownership association. Our role is to provide cost-efficient and stable funding for local government investments on the back of a very strong credit rating. We are AAA rated from both Moody's and Standard & Poor's, and as such gain access to cost-efficient funding both in national and international funding markets. We account for approximately 60% of the external funding needs of Swedish local governments, which tend to invest quite intensively in various types of infrastructure investments. And given their broad mandate as local government entities, with responsibilities ranging from public housing, welfare services, including schooling, healthcare, and also including public transport and energy supply. We started green financing, evaluating it in 2013 and 2014. In 2015, we began extending green loan for local government investments. And in March 2016, we're able to issue our inaugural green bond, which was the largest ever issued at the time. And since then have enjoyed continuous growth in this loan program, given that an increasing share of Swedish local governments have come to embrace the concept of using green loans to facilitate and advance their work on a sustainable transition. Today, some nearly 700 green investment projects in around 200 Swedish cities are financed by green loans from Kommuninvest. We have 11 green bonds outstanding, and we are the largest green bond issuer out of the Nordic countries. So we have extensive experience in extending green loans to local governments and financing these loans through the issuance of green bonds in both in Swedish capital market and in international capital markets. And I would like to focus on some of the key areas that we find are critical to ensuring the environmental integrity in green bonds. Cedric pointed out in the previous presentation the importance of a credible green bond framework, and I would strongly agree. This is the starting point for a credible green finance programs, ensuring that the framework design is well thought through and that it follows established market principles, namely the ICMA Green Bond Principles. Cedric was also referring to the increasing presence of different taxonomies around the world. In Europe, we have the EU taxonomy, which is a green classification system outlining the eligibility criteria, essentially, for various economic activities to be aligned with long-term sustainability objectives. So that's an important pillar. I will come back to that. Selecting the projects. In the case of Kommuninvest, the project selection process takes place at the local government level in close collaboration between the finance team and the environmental team or sustainability team at the local government, and also often involving various other disciplines and people and areas within the local government. Projects are then pre-screened at Kommuninvest before a decision in an expert committee that we have established. I will come back to that. And assuming that the project is approved, which is most often the case, but not always the case. There are examples of rejections also because of non-compliance with a framework criteria. Then, assuming the project is approved, it is included in the green loan pool and can be provided finance. Then an important aspect is also the continuous monitoring and follow-up of these projects. At Kommuninvest, this is undertaken during the annual impact reporting phase, during which all projects are required to report back to Kommuninvest on their compliance with framework criteria. And this regularly enables us to discover cases of non-compliance. So that is an important control mechanism that is also appreciated by our clients. Last but not least, assurance and verification around the framework is critical. Cedric pointed to the importance of the second party opinion. But you also have ongoing assurance and verification manners. So let me just explain how we have organized our project evaluation phase. So once the projects have been identified at the local government level and a loan application supplied to Kommuninvest, and the projects have been pre-screened by our lending staff, the projects are put up for a decision at the Committee for Green Financing, which we have had in place ever since we started this program nearly 10 years ago. This is an expert committee comprised of experts from the local government sector, including both city representatives and representatives from municipal companies, which are very strong in Sweden, manifold and important investment actors. And we also have the Swedish Association for Local Governments and Regions on the committee with one of their senior environmental experts. So these people are working on a day-to-day basis inside the local government sector on the specific topics, environmental and sustainability topics that come to light in the loan applications. This committee is also in charge of approving the annual impact reporting, I should add, and participate in the continuous development of framework criteria, which I will also come back to. I also mentioned the importance of impact reporting, which we undertake also in accordance with ICMA Green Bond Principles to report back to investors on an annual basis on the progress of projects and their expected calculated environmental impact. When we started out back in 2015, 2016, we realized that impact reporting can be undertaken in a range of ways and can have very different outcomes dependent on the assumptions that you put into calculations. So in order to foster a harmonized approach from Nordic issuers and robust, transparent, and pragmatic reporting practices, we started collaborating together and issued a first paper in 2017, which has since been updated. Yes, Jaume.
Just a friendly reminder that you have 1 more minute left. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, so this position paper outlines the reporting commitments made by Nordic green bond issuers and is also the guidance that we use when we undertake impact reporting. And I invite you to look into all these documents after the seminar. I'll end with just an example of how we try to ensure environmental integrity in our latest Green Bond Framework update, which was launched in June, and where we have adapted framework criteria to the EU taxonomy in a way as to make the EU taxonomy a central point of reference for the criteria, but also with green financing requirements that work in practice for Swedish local governments. So we are not abiding by the taxonomy by the letter, but by the spirit, I would say. And we've engaged in a 2-year process involving broad consultation with public sector representatives and also support from 2 leading banks to ensure that we find the right balance between sufficiently ambitious but also pragmatic criteria that can work for local governments. And do remember that green financing is a voluntary mechanism, so we need to make sure that these instruments work for local governments. And of course, having an external opinion on the framework and opining on the project selection criteria and their alignment with sustainable finance principles and long-term sustainability objectives is key. So I'll end there and hand over to you, Jaume. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much, Bjorn, for the extensive also presentation and that really informative. And apologies and thank you for sticking to the time. It is a very packed agenda today. Then without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Takeshi Terunuma to present on behalf of the city of Kyoto. Mr. Takeshi, the floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you well.
Thank you. I'm Takeshi Terunuma. I'm Assistant Director of Kyoto City's Global Environment Policy Office. Today, I would like to talk about Kyoto City's efforts on green finance. First, I will briefly report on our past efforts toward a decarbonized society. In 1997, COP3 was held in Kyoto with pride and sense of mission as a place where Kyoto Protocol was adopted. In cooperation with our citizens and the private sectors, we have taken various initiatives to lead other local municipalities of Japan. In 2004, Kyoto City enacted the Kyoto City Ordinance of Global Warming Countermeasures. It was the first ordinance in Japan focused on global warming. When the 49th session of the IPCC was held in Kyoto in 2019, City of Kyoto declared net zero by 2050, ahead of other municipalities in Japan. In 2021, Kyoto City formulated the Kyoto City Plan of Global Warming Countermeasures for 2021 to 2030. And now we are implementing carbon neutral efforts by 2050. Okay, next slide. Thank you. The plan aims to reduce 2030 GHG emission by 46% from that of 2013 by accelerating energy efficiency and rapidly expanding the renewable energy use. To achieve this, City of Kyoto set the reduction target for each field: lifestyle, business, energy, and mobility. And we will move forward for decarbonization. For example, in the field of energy, the buildings with total floor area of 300 square meters or more is required to install renewable energy equipment. And City of Kyoto grants subsidies to promote installation larger than the required standards, and for the houses to install solar energy equipment and storage batteries. Next slide, please. Now, I would like to talk about the overview of Kyoto City's Green Bond. In the Kyoto City's plan for global warming countermeasures, Kyoto City is promoting green finance by expanding the use of ESG finance and green bond as a mechanism to create a positive cycle between the environment and the economy. As an environmentally advanced city, Kyoto has placed the transformation toward net zero by 2050 as its growth strategy and is working on the projects to promote ESG finance to attract domestic and global ESG investments, and loans to support new business that contribute to the SDGs as growth industries. As one of its policies, Kyoto works to foster momentum for local companies to raise funds through ESG finance. Next slide, please. The first Kyoto City's Green Bond in the field of environment was issued as a publicly offered municipal bond in December 2022. And the second one was issued in January this year. As for this year's issue, the bond has been highly rated, and there was approximately Japanese yen 8.5 billion demand for the total issue of Japanese yen 7 billion. Actually, 29 organizations purchased the bond, and out of them, 27 organizations promised to invest and support green initiatives. In fact, this time we could raise funds with a coupon rate close to that of the Japanese municipal bonds issued around the same time. Next slide, please. According to Kyoto City's Green Bond Framework, the raised funds will be used in the efforts to reduce CO2 emission, not only for LED conversion and for upgrading city-owned facilities, with excellent environmental performances, but also for climate countermeasures such as improvement of river areas and others. What you see now is for fiscal year 2022 and as for fiscal year 2023. Planting trees promotion business is added. Next slide, please. In recognition of such efforts, Kyoto City, as the first Japanese municipality, won Bond Award 2023 in local authority municipal category by Environmental Finance, a global journal. The judges highly praised Kyoto's use of the fund raised through Kyoto City's Green Bond as a green field the municipality could work for, including unique efforts focusing on biodiversity, reduction of energy consumption, and improvement on river areas. Kyoto City received the Green 1F, the highest rate by the third-party organization in terms of compatibility with the 2021 edition of the Green Bond Principles by the International Capital Market Association and Green Bond and Sustainability Linked Bond Guidelines 2022 by the Ministry of the Environment of Japan. In addition to Kyoto City's own green bond in fiscal year 2023, Kyoto City issued a joint green bond of Japanese yen 11 billion, utilizing the joint insurance scheme with local governments. From now on, we will further expand the issue of green finance. We promote decarbonizing company management in Kyoto. We promote creating new business and innovative opportunities. And most importantly, City of Kyoto will further accelerate its efforts towards a decarbonized society for the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Takeshi, for the very illustrative presentation on the city of Kyoto. Also checking the time, I would like then to, without losing any time, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Narayana to present on behalf of the province of Bali. Dr. Narayana, the floor is yours.
Sorry, Joma, it seems that Dr. Narayana is not in the call anymore. He was...
Okay, that is not then an issue. We will check internally whether Dr. Narayana can join us back. And in the meantime, we could go as scheduled and go into the answering some of the questions raised by the audience while waiting for Dr. Narayana to join us again. There were some questions raised to specifically, I believe, to Cedric on the mechanisms that are available now. Mr. Kai Embren asked whether, given the increase on harsher climate change conditions and the rising cost for everyone, for not only local governments but also for individuals, first question is if there are insurances developed to meet these climate risks. So talking about perhaps other solutions that cover this or provide this insurance against climate catastrophes or onset events, and whether there are solutions already that are being developed that could be interesting to share. And there was another question on another climate finance mechanism such as crowdsourcing, whether it is, to your experience, perhaps a tool that can serve to increase capital at the local government or create jobs. And the final question also related to these methods and on whether there's an importance on the independency of local governments to have decision-making power to use these different financing tools. Cedric, do you think you could address these three-pronged question?
I cannot really comment on crowdfunding. And I'm sorry, what was the first point?
The first part was whether if you have any experience with insurances that have been developed to protect against climate risks.
I mean, when a bank works on the financing, obviously we look at the credit worthiness of the borrower. So sometimes there may be some insurance that is required, but I haven't got direct experience on what type of insurance would be available. This would need to be asked with an insurance company, or sometimes there are some organizations that provide guarantees. For example, in Southeast Asia, there is a trust fund from the Asian Development Bank called CGIF that provides guarantees for bond offering. The same exists with Guaranco, which is also an organization that provides guarantees when a bond issuer wants to come to market. And the bank advises the issuer to use this kind of guarantee to be able to come to market. It's not directly linked to climate risk. It's a more general consideration of the credit profile of the borrower. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure the insurance market must be developing certain types of products. Although we also hear that the insurance companies are less and less willing to insure some of the infrastructure that are exposed to climate risk or the property sector as well. So that could be a double-edged sword as well.
Thank you so much, Cedric. We also had then more of a question to all panelists. I would perhaps direct it first to Mr. Togo Uchida on which are the biggest gaps and needs to scale up the green finance innovative solutions in terms of governance, leadership, education, and perhaps if you could share from the experience in Japan or your own viewpoints. Thank you, Togo.
Thanks. This obviously is depending on who you are and what you represent. As for example, Cedric and Bjorn have mentioned, I think there's a growing demand for investors to invest on green-related projects and activities. So there are investors who are willing to invest, but of course, you need to be credit worthy, as well as you have to be creative at the same time. So, and of course, there are a lot of consultants and a lot of companies who could support local governments to access these funding. But on the other hand, the local governments will need to build their own capacity to implement projects or implement policies. This is really fundamental. So I think I would say from my stand, the governance will be very important to make sure that the basics are how do I say can be implemented. I hope that could be the answer. Thanks.
Thank you, Togo, for the canned answer. And I see there's a hand raised from Bjorn. Please, Bjorn.
Yes. Based on the Swedish experience, which I would say is a relatively mature market now in terms of green finance, where municipalities and other public sectors have had access to green finance for a number of years. I would say a number of things. First, as regards to innovation, I think we now have a broad suite of innovative sustainable finance solutions as introduced by Cedric. There's a wide selection of sustainable finance instruments that can be deployed at the city level, at the regional level. In the case of Sweden, I would say the most important challenge is scaling up. And in order to scale up, I think governance is key. We see a number of examples. I mentioned in my presentation that Kommuninvest now has 16% green loan share. We also see certain local governments which have stated ambitions to have 100% green finance share in their funding. And obviously, if these ambitions were replicated across all Swedish municipalities, then Kommuninvest's green finance share would be much higher. And critical to scaling up, I think, is, as I said, governance, ensuring engagement from the political level at the local governments in order to basically require from the civil servants employed by the city or the regions to engage in green finance. Actually, introducing such a requirement into the steering documents, ownership directives, etc., that the politicians use to direct the work within their constituencies. So I think that is key.
I would like to add one more thing, is that sometimes the local government does not need to raise financing directly. They can mandate some private entities to deliver some services, and then this private entity will be able to raise financing using green loans or green bonds based on the concession that they get from the local government. And that way, we've seen a number of examples where that is the case, like the SPV that I was mentioning, which was financing local buses, or in some developing countries, we see that it's actually happening. It's a way to open the door for green financing because the local government may be a little bit weak, or it doesn't have the mandate from the central government to raise its own financing. So that could be a way as well. And the national government also can do it on behalf of the local government and then channel the financing. We've seen in Indonesia, for example, the government has very successfully implemented a program of green sukuk issuance that channels funds towards local projects. So that's another way to do it as well.
Thank you to the three of you for the very, very comprehensive as well answer, and very thorough and taking stances on different points, and really, really helpful for the audience as well to understand what are the missing gaps and perhaps opportunities as well there. I would like to ask perhaps one more question from Ritika Fernandez on if you have any nature-based solutions that have been funded using these innovative finance mechanisms, and I'm looking to the three of you in case you would like to take the floor, or you can share anything from your end. Please take the floor and unmute yourselves.
I have to say, unfortunately, no. In our experience, we have a green bond framework allowing finance in 8 different project categories, including what we used to call environmental management and now called biodiversity, and where nature-based solutions would fit if there was indeed investment projects. We typically have very, very limited demand for loan financing for such investments. That doesn't mean that they are undertaken at the local government level. They certainly are, but I would venture to say that the local governments are not engaging in external funding for such projects, but are self-financing such initiatives.
From my side, at least in the case of Japan, some of the green bond, the usage of the fund is allocated on biodiversity preservation as well as improving the infrastructure. And some of these infrastructure can be considered as nature-based solutions, but not as, how do I say, mentioned directly as nature-based solution infrastructure. Actually, in the case of Japan, the ministries are now trying to define what is nature-based solution. Maybe that could be some further development in the future. But I think that would be the answer.
At SMBC, we are also interested to look at nature-based solution, but it's not easy to find projects that are financeable. Even though we've published our TNFD report, which is a way banks try to see how their financing impacts biodiversity. So this is something that actually we would be interested, but it's not so easy to find right projects. And I would like to add that Pak Narayana has been called into a meeting, but there's someone else who can speak on his behalf if you want to pass him the mic.
Oh, thank you, Cedric. Sorry, Pak Nara had another meeting, but I am Prahasanto from INSET. So INSET is like a non-profit organization. Now is to support government, provincial government of Bali, Indonesia, in transition toward net zero emission for 2045, yeah, 15. So some of our activity to support them is the first is green hotel standardization in tourism area, Bali tourism area. And the second is transition from the green building by using like a photovoltaic or solar cell. And the third, we are now support by Bapenas, planning bureau in national level to develop like regional regulation on circular economy is what we done, what we are right now doing and support for Bali provincial government toward net zero emission. So this is some of our initiatives. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mr. Yudi, for the intervention and for keeping it very concise. Since we are reaching out the end of the presentation on the webinar, I would like to perhaps give the floor to Mr. Togo Uchida to give the closing remarks for the webinar. Please, Togo.
Okay, thank you very much for all of the participants and speakers, especially for sharing your valuable knowledge. And I think the participants has kind of grasped the diverseness and of the approaches that's been taken and potential for local governments to access to these finances through different kind of schemes. And really, I think it's really difficult for us to capture the total picture because I think there are thousands and thousands of different kind of schemes available up there. But I think one point which is striking me when I participate in these kind of meeting is that there's always a gap between for those who are on the demand side as well as for those who are preparing the scheme and preparing the product to support. And I think and there was a question from the audience about what would be the key aspects. And I think it's really important for us to kind of have this kind of webinar to share these knowledges because this is a starting point to even to speak in the same language, really, because some of those financial terms are quite tricky and difficult for others to understand. On the other hand, the local government have its own reality, which is difficult for the financial sectors to also understand. So it's really important to maybe for us to have these kind of occasions more frequently, to exchange ideas, to be linked, to be connected, and then seek the potential, and then really to be enthusiastic and to be active in trying to find your own solution for your own local government. And then talk about this, how do I say, demand to the relevant networks and organizations such as ICLE, who will be definitely available and will be happy to respond to any kind of needs that is available, needs there on the ground. So I would like to thank again for all the participants and also the speakers, and hope to see all of you somewhere in different kind of occasions. And then, yes, there was a question, I think. Yes, you can get a copy of the presentation, and also the copy, the recording of this webinar will be available. So you'll be notified later on. So thanks again, and hope everyone will have a good rest of the day and rest of the week. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.